I'm taking 70% of your millions, including your dad's estate. My name is Paul Blake. I'm 32. And those were the words my wife, Victoria, said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, right there in open court, in front of a packed gallery, and a judge who'd seen more broken vows than I care to imagine. People think a moment like that explodes. Mine didn't. It went quiet. The air pulled out of the room like a door opening on a pressurized cabin. I heard the judge call us to order. I watched my wife smooth the navy dress she'd bought on my credit card and nod at her attorney like a trained actress hitting her mark. I didn't look back at the friends she'd invited to watch my supposed defeat. I just kept my hands folded and remembered 5 words my father told me the day he learned he was dying. Trust is earned. Protection is built. If you like stories where greed meets a wall it can't climb, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear is how 3 generations of sweat didn't get swallowed by 3 years of entitlement. I didn't grow up around yachts or golf. I grew up around rebar, diesel, and the kind of men who shake your hand like they mean it. My dad, Ray Blake, was a machine whisperer. He could tell you what was wrong with a backhoe by the sound it made idling on a hot day. Steel speaks, he'd say, if you respect it. We started with 2 used bulldozers and a truck with a door that wouldn't close unless you lifted and slammed. By the time I turned 25, Blake Equipment and Rental was the biggest yard in our part of the Southwest. Phoenix, Tucson. Little dots of towns that needed what we had. Reliable iron, on time, no excuses. My dad wasn't a banker, but he understood numbers. He kept index cards in his pocket and a pencil behind his ear. Equipment values, depreciation curves, fuel costs. It was all there in tight block letters. You don't have to be fancy to be smart, he'd say. You have to be consistent. When he got sick, I started carrying those index cards. He couldn't hold a wrench anymore, but he could still teach. The last afternoon we spent in the yard, the sun low, heat shimmering. He sat on an upside-down bucket and watched me check the rental board. "Son," he said, "you'll love people with your heart, but you'll protect the business with your paper." He meant contracts. He meant structures. He meant prenups. I didn't know then how prophetic that was. I met Victoria at a construction leadership conference in Tucson. She was everything a room notices first. Tall, poised, that polished marketing confidence. She asked good questions about our fleet utilization and smiled when I said I liked the smell of cut dirt. "You make excavators sound romantic," she laughed, and somehow it didn't feel like a dig. We moved fast. 6 months later, she'd moved into my place. A year after that, we were engaged. Dad was already fighting for breath by then. He took my hand after dinner one night and said it plain. "You'll get a prenup. Not because you don't love her, because we built something that feeds families. Feelings change. Foundations shouldn't." Victoria hated the idea. Said it was unromantic. Said it meant I didn't trust her. Dad paid for her independent counsel, a lawyer of her choosing, to review every clause. She signed after 3 separate meetings. She joked she didn't read the whole thing because she trusted me. I should have listened harder to the joke. The agreement was standard for people with substantial premarital assets. Anything I owned before the marriage, mine. Anything inherited, mine. The business, mine. Anything acquired together during the marriage, ours. No tricks, no traps. Just fences around a legacy. Dad died 4 months after our wedding. He left me index cards with numbers I already knew and one last note folded inside the pocket of his old flannel. "Protect the company, and it will protect you." Then life happened. And marriage, as it turns out, is a lot like a job site. Messy, loud, full of surprises. For the first year, Victoria was attentive. She said she wanted to learn the business. She walked the yard with me, asked what each machine did, marveled when I could glance at a D6 and tell you how many hours it had on the engine without checking. She suggested branding upgrades, social media, new photos. I said sure, later. We were busy and growing. Then her suggestions became complaints. Dinner at places that comped their napkins wasn't enough. She wanted the ones that ironed them. Trips became upgrades, and upgrades became expectations. When I hesitated, she called it small-minded. When I worked late, she called it neglect. I chalked it up to grief. We both missed my dad. I told myself time would smooth the sharp edges. Instead, her edges cut deeper. She quit her job to support me. Support meant long lunches, boutique bags, and girls' trips that showed up on our business Amex with the memo line, client entertainment. When I asked which client liked Cabo in March, she said I was controlling. When I reminded her that business cards buy business things, she said I was cheap. I'm good at ignoring pain. Comes with the territory when you've spent your 20s in sun-baked yards and your 30s on a lift changing a hydraulic line because the tech called in sick. But the pattern sharpened. She asked about valuations. She wanted copies of estate documents my dad's lawyer had already filed. She dropped phrases like community property and marital equity like she'd been practicing in front of a mirror. And then I walked in early one afternoon and found her in my home office with our safe open. My father's portfolio papers spread across the desk and a phone to her ear. She froze when she saw me and started gathering pages like a raccoon caught in a pantry. I was organizing for you, she said. You're overwhelmed. I'm helping. I'm slow to anger, but not stupid. I changed the safe code that night. And I called William Garrett, my father's attorney, the man who wrote our prenup. Bill, I said, do you have a clean copy of everything she signed? He did. We met the next morning. He slid the agreement across his desk like a dealer sliding a card. This is solid, he said. Ironclad. You're covered, Paul. I didn't know then how much I'd need those words. 2 weeks later, the divorce petition landed like a shovel on concrete. Half of everything. Spousal support. A valuation of the company that assumed her presence alone had doubled our revenue. And the boldest line of all, a claim against my father's estate on the grounds that marital lifestyle expectations entitled her to it. I laughed when I read that part. Then I didn't. When I got home that night, she was packing. One suitcase already zipped, one open with a neat tray for jewelry, a lot of which I'd never seen before. You can make this easy, she said, not looking up, or you can make it expensive. I said nothing. I've learned silence scares people who are used to getting their way. She mistook it for weakness. Most do. You don't have a leg to stand on, she continued. We're married in a community property state. Your dad's estate increased our lifestyle. That's ours. I finally spoke. You remember the prenup? Her hands stopped moving. Nobody enforces those anymore, she said. But there was a hairline crack in her voice, like glass under pressure. Judge Williams will, I said. He wrote case law on ones just like it. She zipped the second suitcase and rolled it past me. See you in court, she said. Here's the thing about greed. It's loud. It leaves footprints. It sends emails. It swipes cards. While her attorney drafted a petition that read like a ransom note, my attorney drafted a discovery request that read like a mirror. We pulled her spending records. We subpoenaed phone logs. We found a private investigator, not mine, hers, who'd compiled a glossy packet of my holdings like a menu. He'd done his job so well his report made our case. Everything substantial was premarital or inherited. Victoria had paid $8,000 to document the fact she wasn't entitled to most of what she wanted. I wish I could say that satisfied me. It didn't. Satisfaction wasn't the point. Protection was. My father's words again. Trust is earned. Protection is built. So I built. I sat at my kitchen table the night before the hearing with the prenup on my left and her investigator's binder on my right. I put my father's old index card in my wallet. The pencil lead had smudged the edges over the years, but the numbers were still readable. Debt, cost, margin, reserve. His shorthand for staying in business when others don't. The next morning, I put on a suit that smelled faintly of machine oil, no matter how many times it went to the dry cleaner. And I walked into court like it was a yard on a Monday. Victoria sat at the front with a look you buy, not earn. Her attorney stood and spoke like he was pitching a series on premium cable. Words like sacrifice, partnership, lifestyle. I let him finish. Then I stood, walked to the bench, and handed the judge a manila folder. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice low enough that only the front rows heard. "Two documents. One is a prenuptial agreement my wife signed after independent counsel reviewed it. The other is a report compiled by a private investigator my wife hired to discover my assets. Both speak for themselves." Judge Williams read. He chuckled once, audible enough that even Victoria's friends heard it. He looked over his glasses at her attorney, then at me, then back at the papers. "Mr. Blake," he asked, "is this correct? That Mrs. Blake engaged a private investigator to document assets she is not entitled to under this agreement?" "Yes, Your Honor." He turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Blake, did you sign this agreement with independent counsel present?" She swallowed. I don't remember the details." "Then I will remind you," he said, tapping a line with his pen. "Your signature appears beneath a paragraph confirming you understand the inheritance and premarital assets are excluded. Your counsel's signature sits beneath yours. Silence is heavy when it lands on the unprepared." Her attorney tried to object. The judge waved him off. "We'll get there," Judge Williams said. "But first, Mrs. Blake, I want to hear you say it. Did you sign this?" She stared at the table. "Yes." The judge sat back. "Good, then we can proceed." He didn't rule then. He didn't need to. But the temperature in the room changed. The friends behind us stopped smiling. The man from 2 houses down, Stephen Davis, the neighbor who'd eaten my steaks and then coached my wife on how to take my business, cleared his throat and suddenly found the floor interesting. My hands didn't shake. Not because I'm brave, but because I'd already done the math. Protection is built. What came next would be evidence, timelines, and the slow way that truth pulls a thread until every stitch of a lie comes loose. But before we get there, you need to understand how deep Victoria's plan went, and how far back the pattern started. Because this wasn't a spontaneous grab. It was a long game, and she was certain I was too soft to see it coming. I used to think betrayal had a sound. Shouting, crashing, doors slamming. Turns out, it's quiet. It walks on soft feet and smiles when it lies. After the court hearing was postponed for evidence review, Victoria went silent. No calls, no texts. But silence doesn't mean peace. It means calculation. A week later, my attorney Bill forwarded me a set of emails her lawyer had mistakenly included in discovery. The subject line read, "Strategic Narrative." Inside, I read sentences that still feel like acid. Emphasize emotional support. Portray his business success as a result of her stability. Use gender sympathy. Hard-working wife versus cold businessman. They were building a story, not of truth, but of optics. They wanted to turn my discipline into cruelty, my focus into neglect. The following months crawled. Court dates move slower than paint drying, but those months gave me time to see everything I'd been blind to. I started tracing patterns backward, all the random things that suddenly made sense. The friend she'd met for lunch every Thursday, the one who always paid in cash. That was Stephen Davis, my divorced neighbor. The same man who'd later coach her on how to survive financially. The late-night texts I thought were work drama, they were lists of my assets. Victoria had started this long before she filed, maybe even before she said I do. Every word, every compliment, every kiss in those last months had an agenda attached. I remember one evening, a few months before she left. We were sitting outside, the Arizona air still warm even after sunset. I had a beer. She had a glass of rosé. Out of nowhere, she said, "Don't you ever wish you didn't have to work so hard? I mean, what's the point of all that money if we can't enjoy it?" I told her money wasn't the point. Building something was, leaving something behind. She smiled, but not kindly. "That's what people say when they're afraid to spend it," she said. I laughed back then. I shouldn't have. When Bill told me she'd hired a private investigator, I asked him to find out who the man was. "Name's James Murphy," Bill said, flipping through the file. "Asset discovery specialist. Divorce cases only. $8,000 retainer. $8,000. To dig through the life of the man who'd built her house, paid her bills, and buried his father." Murphy's report was a masterpiece of cold professionalism. He'd listed my company assets, property deeds, every vehicle, even the serial numbers on my dad's old bulldozers. He'd also written one sentence that changed everything. "All significant assets acquired prior to marriage or through inheritance." That line, that simple acknowledgement, made her entire claim collapse before it started. I smiled when I read it, not out of spite, but out of closure. Because for the first time since this began, I realized I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth to walk into that courtroom beside me. Still, something in me wanted to know how deep she'd gone. So, I did what any construction man does when he smells rot behind the wall. I started tearing the drywall open. Bill helped me subpoena Victoria's text messages. The cloud backup revealed months of conversations with Stephen and her lawyer. They weren't discussing love or regret. They were discussing percentages. "He'll settle before court," she texted. "He's too soft. By the time this is over, I'll never have to work again." She wasn't wrong about the first part. I was soft. Once, until I read that line. That night, I drove out to the yard. It was past midnight. I sat on the hood of an excavator and watched the floodlights hum over the steel. I could almost hear my father's voice. "You can't stop people from trying to take what's yours. You can only make sure they fail." And I decided that's exactly what I'd do. Victoria thought she was the hunter, but she never understood the quiet patience of builders, the men who measure twice and cut once. While she was drafting statements, I was laying foundations. I hired my own investigator. I didn't ask him to dig for dirt. I asked him to dig for patterns. He found bank transfers from her to Stephen, labeled consulting fees. He found 2 trips to San Diego listed as marketing conferences that didn't exist. He found a joint account under her maiden name with nearly $50,000 in deposits. She wasn't just planning a divorce. She was preparing an escape fund. I remember holding that report and feeling strangely calm. Because the more evidence I had, the less angry I became. Anger is fire, but evidence is concrete, and concrete lasts longer. A month before trial, she called me. "Paul, can we talk? Just us?" Her voice was soft, too soft. I could hear the performance. I don't think there's much left to say, I told her. You're still my husband, she said. We can end this gracefully. I don't want to destroy you. I laughed quietly. You already tried. I was scared, she said, her tone trembling on cue. After your father died, everything felt uncertain. I made mistakes, but I still care about you. I didn't answer. She filled the silence. Let's meet. Please, one last time. I agreed, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see the kind of person who could say those words without choking on them. We met at a restaurant we used to love. The same table where she once said she'd never care about money. She arrived early, wearing white like innocence. When I sat down, she reached for my hand. You look tired, she said. You've lost weight. I hate that we've become enemies. Enemies. That word hung in the air like a dare. You wanted 70% of everything I've ever worked for, I said quietly. That's not enmity, Victoria. That's theft. Her smile twitched. I just wanted fairness. Fairness, I repeated. Fairness was the prenup you signed. Fairness was the life you lived in comfort while I worked 12-hour days. Fairness was every chance you had to walk away before you lied. Her eyes hardened. The mask slipped for just a moment. You can't win, she whispered. People like you never do. People like me built everything people like you stand on, I said. And tomorrow, you'll learn what that means. She stood up first, dropped a 20 on the table, and left without another word. That $20 bill stayed there, untouched, while the waiter refilled my water. I looked at it and thought how cheap remorse looks when it's faked. Next morning, Bill called. You ready for tomorrow? More than she'll ever be, I said. But what came the next day wasn't just a court victory. It was a lesson in what happens when arrogance meets preparation. The morning of the trial, the air in downtown Phoenix felt heavier than usual. I woke before dawn, ironed my only black suit, and slipped my father's watch onto my wrist. It didn't tick anymore, but I wore it anyway. It reminded me that time doesn't stop. It just keeps moving with or without you. When I walked into the courthouse, Victoria was already there. She stood with her lawyer, smiling like she'd already won. She wore that same navy dress from our engagement party, and the same perfume I used to buy her every Christmas. For a second, I almost saw the woman I fell in love with. Then I remembered the stack of lies that brought us here. The courtroom was small but packed. Reporters from local business journals, a few spectators, even Stephen Davis sitting in the back row, arms folded, face full of smug curiosity. Bill leaned over and whispered, "Don't look at them. Look at me and the judge. We have this locked down." I nodded, though part of me was still angry that it even had to come to this. That 3 years of marriage could dissolve into a public chess match over money that wasn't hers. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Williams, sharp, calm, and allergic to nonsense. He'd been doing family law longer than I'd been alive. He glanced over his glasses at the crowd like a teacher looking for the troublemaker. Victoria's lawyer started first. He had the polished arrogance of someone who rehearsed in the mirror. He painted her as the devoted wife. She sacrificed her career to support Mr. Blake's demanding lifestyle. She provided emotional stability that allowed him to expand his late father's business. He used words like nurture, care, contribution, and sacrifice, words that sound soft until they're used as weapons. He claimed she was integral to the company's growth. He even said her emotional labor had increased the business valuation. I almost laughed, but I didn't. because I knew the best punchlines are the ones you don't have to deliver yourself. When he finished, Victoria reached for a tissue, right on cue. She dabbed at her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. The audience sighed. The performance was working. Then Bill stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. He simply walked to the center of the room and said, "Your Honor, my client has one request. That this court look not at emotion, but at evidence." He opened the folder we'd prepared. The prenuptial agreement, signed and notarized. The private investigator's report. Her private investigator's report. And a summary of every financial transaction she'd made in the last 2 years. The judge took the folder and began reading. The room grew still. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop humming. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, the judge looked up at Victoria. "Mrs. Blake, is it true that you hired a private investigator to document your husband's assets prior to filing for divorce?" Her lawyer jumped in. "Your Honor, that's standard procedure." "I'm not asking you," Judge Williams said, without looking away from her. "Mrs. Blake?" She hesitated, eyes darting toward the back row where Stephen sat. I may have spoken with an investigator. It was just for information." "And did this investigator's report confirm that all major assets were acquired before your marriage?" She swallowed. "I don't recall the details." The judge tapped the paper with his pen. "Then allow me to refresh your memory. It says, and I quote, 'All significant assets were acquired prior to marriage or through inheritance.'" The audience stirred. Even Stephen leaned forward. Bill didn't smile. He simply handed the next document to the clerk, the credit card records. "Exhibit B, Your Honor. Over $60,000 in charges. Designer purchases, luxury trips and jewelry. All billed to marital accounts after she had already retained legal counsel for divorce proceedings." The judge frowned. "Mrs. Blake, do you dispute these records?" "Those were household expenses," she said weakly. "Household?" the judge repeated. "You spent $8,700 at a resort in Cabo San Lucas. Did the household go with you?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. The judge didn't smile. He flipped to the next page. The text messages. "And these," he said. "By the time this is over, I'll never have to work again. Sent from your phone, Mrs. Blake, to Mr. Davis. Do you deny sending this message?" Her face drained of color. "That was taken out of context," she said. "Context," the judge replied, "rarely saves content." Bill stepped closer. "Your Honor, we'd also like to submit evidence that Mr. Davis, a neighbor of both parties, advised Mrs. Blake on how to conceal spending and manipulate financial optics during the divorce process." The judge glanced at Stephen. "Mr. Davis, you're free to remain silent, but if I hear one word of interference, I'll have you removed." Stephen lowered his head. Victoria's attorney tried to regain control. "Your Honor, even if the prenuptial agreement is valid, my client deserves equitable compensation for her emotional contribution." "Enough," the judge interrupted. He turned to Victoria again. "You signed this agreement 3 years ago, with independent counsel. You had every opportunity to read it. Do you deny signing it?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you deny that the agreement explicitly excludes inherited and premarital property?" "No." "Then what exactly do you claim entitlement to?" She stared at him. "Fairness," she whispered. He sighed. "Fairness isn't found in feelings, Mrs. Blake. It's found in the law." He looked down at the prenup, then back up at us. This court finds the prenuptial agreement valid and enforceable in full. Mrs. Blake is entitled to half of any joint marital assets accrued during the marriage, which, after accounting for her own spending, equals roughly $15,000. The gasp that followed wasn't from her. It was from her friends in the gallery, the ones who'd come to celebrate her victory. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mrs. Blake is responsible for all personal debt incurred during the marriage, including credit card balances associated with personal luxury purchases. Mr. Blake, you are awarded reimbursement for legal fees in the amount of $12,000. The gavel came down. One sharp sound. Final. Victoria sat frozen. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't move. Her eyes were glassy, not with tears, but with disbelief. For the first time since this began, the performance had no audience. I stood up slowly, buttoned my jacket, and looked at her. Not with hatred, not even with satisfaction. Just clarity. You said I was too soft, I told her quietly. Turns out, concrete looks soft. Until you try to break it. She didn't respond. Stephen was already gone. Her lawyer gathered papers in silence. Bill shook my hand. Your father would have been proud, he said. He already was, I answered. This was just me catching up. We walked out into the Arizona sun. It was bright, unfiltered, hot as hell, and it felt good. The kind of good that comes not from victory, but from survival. That evening I drove back to the yard. The crew had already gone home. Machines stood lined up under orange light like soldiers at rest. I climbed up on my dad's old bulldozer, the first one we ever bought, and sat there until the sun disappeared. I didn't think about money or court or revenge. I thought about legacy, the kind that's written in grease, sweat, and paperwork, and how close I'd come to losing it because I mistook charm for character. My father once said, "The world will always test what you've built. It's your job to make sure it stands." That night, I finally understood what he meant. The weeks after the trial felt quieter than I expected. No celebration, no victory lap. Just silence. The kind that finally lets your thoughts settle after months of noise. I moved out of the house Victoria once called our dream home. It didn't feel like a dream anymore. It felt like a set that had been struck after the show was over. I rented a modest apartment downtown. 1 bedroom, 1 chair, 1 coffee mug. And for the first time in years I could breathe. The funny thing about loss is that it teaches you addition. When someone strips away the false parts of your life, what's left, finally, is you. I threw myself back into the business. The guys at the yard didn't ask questions. They just handed me a wrench and went back to work. That's the language of our trade. Unspoken respect. We expanded into new markets, updated half the fleet, and for the first time since my father's death, the numbers on the board felt alive again. Every Friday evening I'd sit in the office, turn off the lights, and look at the glow of the yard through the window. That orange reflection of steel and dust. That was home. But life has a way of circling back. 6 months later, I was fueling one of the loaders when Bill called. "You might want to hear this," he said. Victoria filed for bankruptcy. I didn't feel happy or smug, just sad. Because greed doesn't just take, it consumes. She'd burned every bridge she had. The friends who clapped for her in court vanished. Stephen Davis sold his house and moved out of state. And the woman who once bragged she'd never have to work again was waiting tables in Scottsdale, serving men who reminded her of what she lost. Karma doesn't need to announce itself. It just arrives quietly and stays longer than expected. A year after the divorce, I used part of my inheritance to set up a legal literacy workshop for small business owners, men and women who work with their hands, build real things, but don't always understand contracts, taxes, or asset protection. I named it the Ray Blake Foundation after my father. At the first seminar, I told them the same thing he once told me. You don't protect what you own by building higher walls. You protect it by knowing where the doors are. I watched those folks take notes on clipboards. Mechanics, landscapers, welders, a single mom starting her own plumbing company. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not in what I'd rebuilt, but in what I could give back. Every now and then, people still ask me about Victoria. They expect me to hate her. But hate's a waste of good energy. She taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. That love without respect is dependency, and trust without boundaries is an invitation to disaster. She made me sharper. And maybe in her own twisted way, that was her final contribution to my life. I still keep my dad's old index card framed on my desk. The pencil marks are faded now, but the 4 words are still clear. Debt, cost, margin, reserve. I've added a 5th one under it in my own handwriting. Trust. Because everything in life, business, marriage, friendship, runs on that one currency. And when it runs out, you learn who was investing and who was just spending. Sometimes, late at night, I drive out to the old yard on the edge of town. The desert wind hums through the machines like a memory. I climb up on the bulldozer, the first one we ever bought, and I can almost hear my father again. You did good, son. You kept it standing. And I whisper back, yeah, Dad. I kept it standing. Then fade to black.